everyone, this is Celine from Blue Calla Patterns. Welcome to video 5 for the Stonecrop Organizer Satchel. In this video, we're going to assemble the lining of our bag. You're going to need your 4 zipper panel pieces. You should have 2 exterior and 2 lining pieces. Your 2 remaining top band pieces. And I chose to use cork for mine. You're going to need 2 lining panel pieces with interfacing on the wrong side. Your zipper pocket facing piece, also with interfacing on the wrong side. Your 2 lining gusset pieces, they are also interfaced. Your zipper pocket lining pieces, and your 2 slip pocket pieces. You will also need a zipper for your interior zipper pocket. You can use a number 3 dress zipper, but I didn't have any that matched, so I'm going to be using zipper tape for mine. And then you're also going to need your zipper for the main closure of the bag. So we're going to start by sewing our slip pocket in our interior zipper pocket. So you'll need both of your lining pieces and you place them right sides together. And then you pin or clip them along the top edge. And then we're going to sew them together along this top straight edge. Make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once you have the top edge sewn together, we're going to start by first pressing the seam allowance open. And then flip the slip pocket pieces so that they are wrong sides together. And then press the seam allowance again. And then we're going to go over to the machine and we're just going to top stitch that seam allowance with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the top edge. Once you've top stitched the seam allowance, you'll take one of your lining pieces and place the slip pocket on top and then pin it or clip it in place. And we're going to divide this into 2 separate pockets, but first I want to base the pocket to the lining piece all around the edge here with 1/4, 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Either one will work. Okay, once it's basted all the way around, I'm just going to fold the lining panel in half vertically, wrong sides together. And then I'm going to make a mark along the top and the bottom of the slip pocket. And then I'm going to go over to my machine. I'm going to sew from that bottom center mark all the way to the top center mark, and make sure that you backstitch a couple of times at the top to reinforce the opening of the pocket. All right, so we now have 2 separate slip pockets. We're going to set that aside for just a minute. And now you're going to need your zipper facing. And I'm going to get my ruler and my pen. Now we're going to start, so we're going to create a box that is meant for a 9-inch zipper. I am using zipper tape, so it will be a little bit different than if you're using a pre-made zipper. But we're going to start by drawing a rectangle box on the wrong side of our zipper facing piece that is 9 inches wide by 3/8 of an inch high. Okay, make sure that's 3/8 of an inch high, and then your drawing again at the top. And we're going to take the remaining lining piece, and then we're going to place the facing piece. We want it to be 1 inch from the top. So my ruler is 1 inch wide. So I'm going to place the top edge of the lining piece, so it's 1 inch from this top edge. And I'm going to pin that into place, and you just want to make sure that it's centered. It doesn't have to be perfect, but try to have it as centered as possible. Okay. So pin this in place, and then you're going to go over to your machine, and you're going to sew along the lines of the rectangle box, and you're going to keep the needle in the down position. It'll help you when you're rotating the corners to make nice sharp corners. Okay, so I'm going to go sew the rectangle box. All right, so now the zipper facing piece is attached to the lining piece. I'm going to move this out of the way. And now we're going to draw a line through the center of the box. And you don't draw all the way from one end to the other. You can stop about 1/2 inch from the end. And then you're going to draw 4 diagonal lines from each of the 4 corners up to that center line. Doesn't have to be perfectly centered or anything. It's really just to cut an opening. So now we're going to cut along these lines. So I don't cut all the way from one end to the other. I stop about 1/2 inch from each side. Now I'm going to cut along the diagonal lines, and you want to try and get as close as you can to the corners without cutting any of the stitching, because if you cut the stitches, you're going to ruin your zipper pocket opening. Okay. Now this back. So now we're going to pull the zipper facing in through that opening that we just cut towards the wrong side of the lining panel. Like this. And then you're going to roll and press the seam allowance all around the rectangle opening. Now take your time when you're doing this so that you have a nice opening. I usually dampen my fingers and roll the seam between my fingers. It's slow going, but the better job you do in this step, the better it'll turn out in the end. If you don't have the seam allowance coming all the way out, what happens is your lining panel ends up becoming a little bit smaller, and that can lead to errors depending on the pattern. Some are more forgiving than others, but it's better if you have the lining panel remain the same size. And once I've done it on the right side of the lining panel, I usually flip it over and I press again from the wrong side. Okay, so I'll flip it over now, press again. If you have a little bit of puckering at your corners, you can kind of pull them flat and then press. If you have too much puckering, it means that you didn't cut close enough to the corner in the corners. Okay, so this is ready. We're going to just set it aside for a minute. And now we're going to take our zipper pocket lining pieces. And the bottom edge, we're going to be turning through the zipper pocket. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave an opening at the bottom for turning. So fold up the bottom edge about 3/8 to 1/2 inch. It doesn't really matter, as long as both are folded the same amount. And then you're flipping it towards wrong sides together and pressing. You do this for both pieces. Okay, this way. Now for one of the pieces only, we're going to trim off 1 inch at the top. So you're only trimming away from one of the lining pieces. Now you're going to take this smaller piece and you're going to place your zipper pocket zipper over top. So both of them should be right side facing up. Now I have my pull on the right, and it's basically, this would be the opening and this would be the closed end if you're using a dress zipper. So closed end, open end. Because I use zipper tape, I don't pull my pull all the way, so this part stays closed and it makes it a little bit easier for sewing. Now this is also 11 inches of zipper tape. You should be using, if you're using a pre-made zipper, a 9-inch zipper. So you'll have the zipper stop here and the little stops here for the opening of the zipper. So you just want to make sure that your zipper is centered. So now I'm going to sew the zipper to the lining piece along this top edge with about 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you're going to back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, so the zipper is sewn to the lining piece. Now I'm going to press this lining piece away from the zipper. Okay, then we're going to take the second zipper pocket lining piece and we're going to place the other side of the zipper along this top edge. And we're repeating exactly the same thing. So we're pinning it to the lining piece, and then we're going to sew along this top edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so now I've sewn along the second side of the zipper, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to press that zipper pocket lining piece away from the zipper. Okay, now we're going to take that lining piece that had the zipper pocket opening. You're going to, I'm just going to take this, move it out of the way. So you're going to place the zipper pocket lining pieces with the attached zipper right side facing up. So your zipper is right side facing up. Your lining pieces are wrong side facing up. You want the shorter piece at the bottom and the taller piece at the top. And you place this over top. And you want the edges of your zipper pocket facing piece to line up with the edges of your zipper pocket lining pieces. And then make sure that your zipper is centered inside the opening, the rectangle opening, and pin in place. Now I only add a pin at the beginning and the end because I like to adjust the position of my zipper inside the rectangle box. as I'm sewing to make sure that it's nicely centered. I know some prefer to use double-sided tape or to use glue in this step to glue everything down. You can use whatever method that works for you. I just do this method, and I just find it fast and easy. So now you're going to sew around the rectangle opening with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around, and you're going to be sewing through the lining piece, the zipper pocket facing piece, the zipper, and the zipper pocket lining pieces. Okay, so I've sewn around the rectangle box. Now I'm going to flip this over, and you're going to take this top folded edge and you're going to fold it down to meet the bottom folded edge. And then you can use clips or pins to keep those folded edges together. Okay, now you're going to see that the top piece is a bit longer, and so what I like to do is press that going in an upwards direction. And then what that does is it kind of presses that top lining piece away from your zipper. Now we're going to sew up the sides of the zipper pocket to close it. We're going to not sew the bottom folded edge. We're leaving that open so that we can use it to turn the bag in the last steps. So you're flipping this so that you can see the lining panel, the right side of the lining panel. And then you flip this out of the way, and you're going to sew from the top here. You're going to backstitch, sew as close as you can. See, there's these little triangles of fabric. So you're sewing over those, and then go all the way down to the bottom folded edges and backstitch again. And you're going to do the same thing on this side. Backstitch, sew all the way down, and then backstitch again at the bottom folded edges. Okay, so I've used contrasting thread so you can see that I've sewn along the sides, and now it's closed except for the bottom. And I'm just going to trim the seam allowance just at the bottom edge here. It'll just help it to make it a bit easier to sew the lining shut in the last step. Okay, and now I want you to open your zipper all the way and leave it open. Okay, we'll set that aside. Now you'll need your lining pieces, and we're going to, it's very simple, we're just going to sew them together in the middle. So we are sewing this shorter end. You should have them pinned or clipped right sides together, and you just sew, backstitch, sew, and then backstitch again. Okay, so they're sewn together here. Now we're just going to press that seam allowance open. First from the wrong side, and then I press it again from the right side. And now I'm going to go over to the machine. I'm just going to top stitch that seam allowance along both sides of the seam. Okay, so I've top stitched along both sides of the seam. We can just set the lining gusset aside for now. Now we're going to need our main closure zipper and our zipper panels. And what I'm going to do is, now normally I would do the basting of the zipper first, but what I want to do is, because I have to do some gluing and I want to give the glue a chance to dry, I'm going to do that first. So for the two lining pieces, because it's fabric, I can just press. So I take just the one short end and I press it about 1/4 inch towards the wrong side. Okay, so we're just doing the one, and I'm going to use a clip just so that it kind of, when it cools off, it stays folded. Now I'm going to do the same thing for this side. This second lining piece, just one side, 1/4 inch, wrong sides together, and press. And put a little clip, let it dry. Let it cool off. Okay, now for the cork pieces, I want to do the same thing, but I can't press it. So what I will actually do is use a bit of fabric glue. So I'm just going to use some Fabri-Tac. Okay, and just put a small amount here. And here. And then fold a 1/4 inch. And I'm going to use these clips to hold it in place until the glue is dried a little bit. Okay, and the same thing for the second piece. And there we go. So now what I'm going to do while that's drying, I'm going to take my zipper and I want to fold out the opening, the zipper tape at the openings 90 degrees outwards. So first I'm going to make a mark along the top and the bottom at exactly the same location, top and bottom. So I'm going to do it about, I'll do 3/4 of an inch from the end. Doesn't matter the distance as long as you give yourself enough room to work around it, and make sure that your marks here are perfectly aligned this way. Okay, now I'm going to open that, and what I want to do is I want to base stitch the zipper so that it is angled outwards, 90-degree angle. So at that mark that I made, you pinch the zipper tape, and then you fold that pinch upwards to meet the coil, like this. And then you're going to go over to your machine and you're going to base that in place. And then you're going to do the same thing for the other side. And you want to try and have that curve outwards to be aligned. So you want them to be exactly in the same location. All right, so this is what the end of your zipper should look like when you're done. Now you're going to take one of the lining pieces. Okay, you can take the clip off now. And you're going to place it right side facing up on your work surface. And you want the folded end to be at the closed end of your zipper. And you're going to place this over top. So they're both right side facing up. And you want this curved end of your zipper to be 3/8 of an inch away from this end of your zipper. And you can use clips or pins to hold it in place. And then you're just going to quickly base this in place with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from this top edge. Okay, so not 1/4 inch, you just want to do 1/8 of an inch and just quickly baste it to this lining, zipper panel lining piece. Okay, so the zipper is basted in place. Now you're going to take one of the zipper panel exterior pieces and you're going to place it over top, wrong side facing up, so they're right sides together. You're going to start here by clipping the folded ends together, so making sure that they are nicely lined up. And then clip along this side. And then you want to line up these straight edges, clip those together. Now when you're sewing this next part, you're going to have to move that zipper pole out of the way. And one last bit here. So now we're going to sew this together. You're going to start here with 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch seam allowance, however your zipper foot allows you to get to the, however close it allows you to get to the zipper coil. I usually do, I think, 1/4 inch. Back stitch and sew up this shorter side, stop and rotate so that you have, so that you're sewing here along this entire edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then you're going to sew the entire way. When you reach the folded ends, you're going to stop and you're going to back stitch. Try not to sew too far past this folded edge. All right, so these are all folded, sewn together. Now I'm going to just turn it over so you can see my stitching. I used a contrasting thread color so that you could see. Now what we're going to do is we want to flip this, but we're going to need to trim away a little bit here at the corner. I try not to trim the zipper because I don't want it to come undone. And I've already heat sealed the cut ends of my zipper tape. And now I want to flip this, and I find it easier if I close my zipper. So you want to flip it, the zipper panels, so that they are wrong sides together. And because I'm using cork, I can't press the cork, so what I usually do is I just line up these edges and I use clips to hold them together. And then I'm going to top stitch, but when I top stitch, again, because I wasn't able to really press, use something to poke out the corner here. I usually just finger press as I'm top stitching. And I'm also kind of tugging. So I'll start top stitching here, stop and rotate, and then I'm kind of tugging them, making sure I want these edges here to be nicely aligned, because if your zipper panels aren't nicely aligned, you're going to have trouble sewing them into the lining. Okay, so I'm going to go very slowly. Now, if you're using fabric, this will not be an issue because all you have to do is press the seam allowance flat here, and then turn it around and press the seam allowance flat here as well. So I kind of made it a little bit more difficult for myself, but it's not too bad. I'm used to doing it this way. So you're going to top stitch here all along the zipper, and then you're top stitching again here. You're closing that folded end of the zipper panels together. Okay, so I did do the top stitching here along these three sides, and then what I also did was I did a quick basting stitch so that those outer edges, the raw edges of my zipper panel lining and exterior pieces stay together. So now we're going to repeat exactly the same steps. So this is my second zipper panel lining piece with the folded end near the closed end of the zipper. And this time, when I'm placing this on top, I want to make sure that the folded ends here are aligned with these folded ends, because you want these edges of your zipper panel and these edges of your zipper panels to be nicely aligned in the end. So we're doing exactly the same thing. We're basting this in place with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So really the key thing to remember when you're sewing zipper panels is to try and be precise so that everything ends up nicely aligned in the end. Okay, so I'm going to go and baste that in place, and then I'm going to do exactly what we did in the previous step and clip this like this so they're right sides together, making sure that the folded end is aligned, sewing together. You might want to open up your zipper just to get this part of the zipper panel out of the way. It'll make it easier when you're sewing these shorter ends together. All right, so this is what our assembled zipper panel will look like. Now we're going to mark the centers. So you're going to fold the zipper panel in half this way, and you're going to mark the center here and here. So at the top and the bottom here. Then you're going to take your lining panels and fold them in half. And you're also going to mark the centers here on the right side at the top. And do the same for the second. And this is just to make sure that when we're attaching our zipper panels that they are nicely aligned in the center. You're also going to need your top band pieces. And once again, I already have my centers marked on those, and I also have the arrow indicating which edge is going to be at the top edge of my bag. So this is actually the edge we're going to be attaching to the lining pieces, the bottom edges. So I'll start with one lining panel, and I place my zipper panel on top, and you're lining up those center marks that we just made. Okay, now normally I would tell you to do it in 2 steps and base this in place and then place this on top. So I just, for the sake of making it a little bit less long here, I'm just going to clip this here. So again, I'm just lining up all those center marks together. Clip here, clip here. Just make sure all those top edges are lined up nicely. And okay, so then I'm going to sew through all the layers, starting here, backstitch, and sew all the way across and then backstitch again. And you're using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so all the layers are sewn together. If you're using fabric, you can press the top panel upwards, and then your seam allowance is also facing upwards. And you're going to top stitch this seam allowance. Okay, I've top stitched the seam allowance. Hopefully you can see that. Now we're just going to, so you're pushing this top band and this lining panel away, and you're going to grab the second lining piece, and you're repeating exactly the same steps we just did to attach the other side of the lining panel to the remaining lining piece. Sorry, I think I said lining panel. It's zipper panel. Okay, and again, the same thing. Line up those center marks and clip these in place. And I'm clipping the bottom edge, not the top edge. This. And doing exactly the same thing. I have glue all over my hands. Okay, so again, sewing across, backstitch and backstitch. Okay, so we have everything's attached now, so you should look like this from the top, and if we flip it over, it looks like this from the bottom. Now, I did not mark the centers on the bottom of my lining pieces, so I'm just going to do that right now with the pattern piece. That's my bottom, middle, center. And here I have the stitching from the slip pockets, so that's done for me. And now we're going to do pretty much exactly the same thing as we did with the exterior to attach the gusset to the lining. So you start by lining up that center seam of your gusset with the center seam at the bottom of one of the lining panels, and then you're going to go to the top. You're going to clip this top corner of your gusset to the top corner of one of the lining top band pieces. And then you're going to go ahead and clip everything else in between. So I'm going to clip it entirely because when we are sewing the gusset lining to the lining shells, we're going to do it a little bit differently. We don't want to sew with the same seam allowance as the exterior. We actually want to sew with a larger seam allowance. Now, if you have some puckering in the corners, what you can do is just clip little notches in about 1/4 inch maximum, just so that everything kind of sits nicely there. Okay, so I just clipped a couple of little notches, and that'll just help it, everything will just sit nicely. Okay, I'm just going to finish clipping this so I can explain the change in seam allowance when you're sewing the lining together. Try to do it quickly without making any mistakes. Again, I'll probably have a bit of puckering, so I'll just do some clipping in the seam allowance. Now make sure you're not clipping too deep. You just want a maximum 1/4 inch clips. Okay, so I'm not clipping both sides. I'm just clipping the first side, and then you're going to repeat exactly the same thing, and you're going to clip the second side. Now when you're sewing your lining shells, you should start at the top here with the regular seam allowance, so 3/8 of an inch. And then as you're going down the side, you should increase your seam allowance to 1/2 inch, from 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch, and this really varies on a couple of things. The kind of materials that you use, the kind of interfacing that you used. Because if you think about it, your exterior shell has foam or fleece added to it, which makes the interior smaller. As a result, you need to increase the seam allowance on your lining shell so that it fits snugly inside and it's not baggy. So this is something that I usually tell people to do for every pattern. So start at 3/8 of an inch because you need those top side seams to match. And then as you're sewing down, you increase to 1/2 inch or 5/8 of an inch. You have to use your best judgment on that. Maintain that larger seam allowance all the way. When you start going up towards the top, you want to return to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure that you also backstitch at the beginning and the end of this seam. Okay, so I've gone ahead and sewn 3/8 of an inch, and then I tried increasing to 1/2 inch, and I'll see how that fits. Now we're going to repeat exactly the same thing and clip the other lining panel to the gusset and sew it together. So I'm not going to make you watch me do all that. It's exactly the same steps that we've just done. Okay, so my lining shell is complete now. Oh, I accidentally sewn. I'm gonna have to get my seam ripper. I sewed the bottom edge of my, oh, no, I got it up. So maybe make sure you don't do that. I'm just going to do, there's two things to do before we end this video. Trim your seam allowance along both sides here of your gusset. And then if you haven't done it already, you should really sew the ends of your, if you're using zipper tape, you should really sew the end of the zipper, because in the next step, in the final assembly, we're going to need to open our zipper wide open. We don't want to accidentally pull right off the zipper tape. So trim your seam allowance and sew the end of your zipper shut. And then in the next video, we're going to do our final assembly and we're going to sew up our crossbody strap.